Let's go for the actual score. Europa Natural
Greetings and welcome to Europa Natural Law, a roundtable transmission dedicated to healing the madness, the badness, and the sadness plaguing our beautiful, bountiful world. Through regaining our sanity, reclaiming our inborn sovereignty, and honoring our inherent responsibility, we can improve reality. I'm Oscar. I live in Denmark. I'm a student of natural law and I aspire to be a teacher of it as well. And joining me today is my friend KRIS Nelson. KRIS Nelson, please introduce yourself and where you're from and your relationship to natural law.
I'm an alien from another planet. I'm KRIS, and in Canada, my site is evolvedconsciousness.org, and I'm a teacher of objective morality, aka natural law.
And today we'll be talking about gender, more specifically the Hermetic principle of gender. And the best way we can start off, I think, is to go over a definition. I've got a definition right here from the Oxford Dictionary. So the first one is a noun, a classification roughly corresponding to the two sexes and sexlessness, and also a class of noun according to this classification. See masculine, feminine, neuter. I think maybe this second one is relating to grammar. And then a second one, a person's sex. So this is pretty down to earth definition where we're seeing gender being related to biology and to grammar. But today we aren't really just talking about the ordinary sense of the word gender. We already did a roundtable discussion on sexuality that the people can watch. We'll be talking more about the Hermetic principle, and the Hermetic principle is stated like this in the beginning of the chapter. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. So here we're seeing that we're not really talking about only on one plane, on the physical plane of biology or of the anatomy of a being, that they will have certain sex organs, or in some cases even both. They'll have there'll be these hermaphrodites beings. Oh, let me hide this. And so yeah, we're talking about gender as a principle that manifests on many different planes. So some of the things that I think we can relate this principle to is in religion, in physics, or more specifically in with electromagnetism. We'll see this principle in relation to spirituality, and also with epistemology, or the science of knowledge. We'll see the principle of complementation, of the and both, of the paradoxes in logic. And we'll obviously also see the principle of gender in relation to biology. Then we can see the principle of gender in relation to culture and also in relation to psychology. And maybe I can just begin like with the first one here, or I'll begin with the first one here, religion. So when it comes to religion, we'll have the Abrahamic religions, the Judaism, the Islam and Christianity myths or creation myths, having a lot to do with the masculine principle being the creative principle, being that which has, like, you'll have the father, you'll have this principle being you could say the creator of everything. And obviously there's something lacking in this case. If you only have one principle, we all know that we have two parents. So there is no life being generated without both principles playing a role. So when we're looking at these religions, there's a sort of imbalance. And the same goes in modern culture. You'll have new myths. There's a movie called Moana. And in Moana, the creation myth is like the opposite. It starts with that in the beginning there was only ocean. And then from the ocean came like this goddess, if you will, this nature, Mother Nature, and then she's the one that gave life to everything. And again, here we'll have a sort of imbalance, I would say. There's one aspect, there's one of these energies, either the masculine or the feminine energy, that is being worshipped, and the other one is thus kind of made into the villain. So you could say in the Christian myth, where you'll have the myth of Adam and Eve. Eve is the one who is, you could say, tempted to sin. And obviously there's a lot to this myth, which I don't want to dismiss. But one thing that you could say about this myth is that Eve could be the representation of the feminine principle, and in this regard she is associated with evil. And the same kind of happens with this movie Moana that I was mentioning before, a Disney movie. But that's what I was thinking, for example, in relationship to gender, where you can see the principle of gender in relation to the creation myths. What are your thoughts about that, Chris?
Well, what I wanted to talk about is the thing that I know most about gender, or how it, I guess it most importantly applies, and that's related to consciousness. So you can, do you want to read the KYBALION, since we're doing the KYBALION? Do you want to go back to reading the definition if you have it in front of you? And we could define it in relation to how the KYBALION talks about it.
Well, my issue a bit with the KYBALION is I don't really find that it defines it that much. Like it does explore it and go into the topic. I don't
We'll just give that introduction, like the 2 lines introduction, like it does at every chapter.
Yeah, sure,
There you
sure.
go.
So gender is in everything. That's the first sentence. So that's talking about like the universality of this principle, that it is in effect everywhere. And then that it has the masculine and feminine principles. And then also that it manifests on all planes, or like on all scales, if you will.
Yeah. So, yeah, the aspect of gender, like you've been talking about, there are, it relates to polarity, the other principle, and rhythm. Because when you have masculine and feminine. Not that they're necessarily, well, yeah, they're like poles or duality, and they relate to whatever you're talking about, those qualities within. So we could talk about consciousness, and then within consciousness, there's the poles of masculine or feminine. Hold on a second. All right. No. That's not for you. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So normally when we have polarity, we would talk about how there's one thing like darkness, or the default would be darkness, and then you create something, and that's the thing that exists. So you have temperature, and without heat, it's just cold. So without light, there's just dark. So in this case, it doesn't apply the same formula or rules for looking at a polarity. It's not like there's the default feminine, there's the masculine, but you can apply that when you're looking at the polarities like light and dark. Well, the light would be the masculine and the dark would be the feminine. Those are just symbolic correspondences. So again, here we're talking about correspondence and polarity and rhythm. They all interconnect at various levels of I guess the context or the perspective. And so it's not that the feminine is literally the darkness, or the masculine literally is the light, and then the feminine is the default and the masculine is what's created. We're just relating it in symbolic correspondence to make sense of one thing in relation to another, and to look at it in a certain perspective. And so, as I was saying, the thing that I would want to talk about it, that I see the most value in understanding, is related to self-knowledge, when we're talking about understanding ourselves. So one of the slides that I have shared here has something that many people can be familiar with, and that's the breaking down of the brain, the left and right hemispheres of the neocortex, into a masculine and feminine qualities. So the left brain is the masculine one, and the right brain is the feminine one. And so the left brain, analytical, logical, detail, ordering, and female would be like intuitive instead of analytical, and instead of like ordering, more random, chaotic. Could be another way to look at it, as in opposition to order. And rational versus emotional, verbal versus nonverbal. So I guess that would be visual. You could have you could even put, they have cautious and adventurous. So you could put like introvert and extrovert. That would also go for like the cautious. The introverts are more cautious. The extroverts are more adventurous. Planning versus impulse. And math and science versus being creative in the arts and writing. Logic versus imagination. So it's these types of things. And the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain controls the right side. So when you're right-handed, that's a left brain. It's associated with the left brain. And if you're left-handed, you're associated with being more creative and more right-brained. Where did I put the images? Here we go. So that's a basic breakdown. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, see here, we're going to be talking about, we mentioned polarity and the correspondence and the symbolism, how they correspond to each other. But it's also, as I mentioned, rhythm, because it's about going back from one to the other. So the goal isn't to be locked into one side or the other, and you're never going to be in perfect balance, in equal use of both of them at the same time. In certain situations, you're going to use more logic or rational. In other situations, you can be more intuitive or creative, etc. And this image here, well, I guess I should do this first here. I don't have them in order in the folder. And the negative qualities, so we can have positive qualities. All the ones on the previous slide I first read were more positive, in general. They're pretty neutral and positive things. And we can have negative correspondences to qualities that relate to left and right brain. So instead of positive characteristics, these are negative characteristics that fall into like a categorization of a master versus slave mind, or dominator versus pacifistic, which
Where
I
they,
have.
of course, they correlate to the masculine and the feminine, correct?
Yeah.
So the masculine would be the more dominant, whereas the feminine would be the more submissive.
Yeah. So as Passio terms it, the two pillars of enlightenment. Here I have a representation of that. So again, these are the positive aspects related to morality. The active side is self-defense.
Wait, can we stay a bit with the brain hemispheres a bit? I'd like to explore that a bit more with you.
Sure.
Because this really is an interesting topic when it comes to this categorization, or the differentiation between the responsibilities of the different hemispheres. So this is like a generalization. There's the two hemispheres do connect, but it is an interesting thing that our right brain, also when we looking at how we learn something, that like you could say that we're taking in the information, that ability, that capacity for opening up is more related to our right brain. So we're taking in we're collecting the data, and then we're processing that data, and that processing happens more on, like, is more related to our left brain hemisphere, because that's the brain hemisphere that is responsible largely for logic and math, science. So we want to use the scientific method in our processing, but ultimately there is this union of them, correct, where we want to be able to use both, because if we're only in that left brain hemisphere, where we're only thinking logically and mathematically, as you also kind of pointed out, this cautious quality, you could call that in a way also the one that's a bit more closed. It doesn't really want to learn more people or more information, so it becomes a bit too, like, closed-minded, you could say, right? But that's not to mean that this kind of thinking is stupid necessarily, because it can be really advanced intellect, and like being able to think really far ahead and logically and so on. Just as much as if one was to be more using most of the right brain hemisphere, that could lead to just overstimulating yourself, like the stereotype would be the individual who is taking a lot of psychedelic experiences, right, where they're experiencing a lot of things, or they're going to a lot of social gatherings, but the time to process the data that they're collecting isn't really taken. There's not really much time being spent on the science part, so it becomes quickly maybe conspiracy theories that aren't really holding factual, or like it becomes this other imbalance. So the slide that you had regarding the master slave thinking, where we're looking at the worldview, that kind of is saying something similar, right? Can you go through that slide?
Yeah. Yeah, they're all interrelated. That's why I went back to the other one to finish like the positive and then get into the negative, but this one shows the brains, so we'll stick with this. So the master and slave think is an imbalance where you're, as Oscar mentioned, you could be more into the left side in the preponderance or the majority of what you do in your daily life and overall in your life, or in the right side overall in your life. And what that can lead to is this idea of a master think or a slave think, where you get into rigid thinking and you don't accept other points of view. You're not willing to, so that's the rigid skepticism, where you just deny everything. That can, as I have as the third point, solipsism. So how does that relate to solipsism? Well, you're going to deny even the existence of others. You're going to just say that the only thing you can know is your own mind, and anything about the world you can't know. So that's an extreme form. So this rigid skepticism is the polar opposite would be naivete. So where you're naive and you just, as Oscar mentioned, it's open and you just let everything in and you just accept everything. So you get fooled that way, you get deceived. Hence why I have mind control in the middle. And this is the tarot devil card. And the chains are on them loosely, which they could take off, but they're accepting to be enslaved. So when you're in these imbalanced forms, these negative representations of the left and right brain, well, you end up being under mind control because your perception of reality is distorted, and you end up engaging, as I have at the top there, in cognitive dissonance, where you're deliberately ignoring reality, resulting in self-imposed chains of mind control. So as I mentioned, naivete. When you're naive, you just accept things. So you'll just believe in things and you'll be deceived because people can just tell you things and they won't be true, but you'll think that they're true. And skepticism, well, things can be true that are told to you and you're not going to look into them. You're just going to reject what's true. So you're not going to have things that are true, and you could believe things as well that are false, and then they won't be corrected by any truth. And moral relativism tends to be more in the left brain because of the denial of like a creator or whatever, that, or not even necessarily, just that rights and morals are 100% created by man, and they don't exist objectively. So then they're all relativistic and we just make them up as we want. And that leads to social Darwinism, where imitating the jungle of the amoral animals in the animal kingdom, where the might makes right instead of the right making the might as right as what is the right thing to do. The mighty just decide what is accepted and what happens. So that's social Darwinism, and then they get self-centered and egotistical and think that they can decide for everybody who gets to live and who dies, hence eugenics, and you have authoritarianism and the dominator. So the master think is the dominator mindset, as I put here in my morality presentation. The domination ideology versus the submission ideology. And the slave is the opposite of those aspects. So naive, and you believe in religion instead of, you follow religion instead of scientism, so the organized religions, and you can still have solipsism because I think it applies like God decides everything and you have no free will and you can't know anything. I forget how it ties into the right brain specifically, but you end up with unworthiness. Instead of being a dominator, you have low self-worth and self-valuation, so you have more self-loathing. And it's not that the right side, the left side can't have these qualities either, because oftentimes it's both sides that are shared in some way.
Yeah, like one
by
way
these
would be,
individuals.
for example, like in the regard, like in relationship to government, one could have like a self-loathing or the following willing slave submissive mindset. But then when it comes to one's choice of whether or not one will eat animals, that master dynamic mindset could come in, because it could be like, well, I have the right to dominate, or like to kill animals because I am the apex of the ecosystem or so. So obviously, as you're saying, no, I don't know if it's obvious, but that's one example of how both these mindsets can be, one individual can have both these mindsets in different areas. And again, this is all about how, at least that's how I see it, that these two dynamics will always be, will always both play a role in what is created. So both the mindset of dominating and the mindset of submitting are both responsible for creating the condition of slavery. Obviously, it could, if not, I keep saying it's obvious, but my point is that if one only points at one of these two, if one say it's like the reason that there is chaos and slavery, it's an evil, it's all because of the dominators. It's all about because some people want to have this master mindset. One is leaving out a part of it that is equally responsible for it. Just as if one says it's all because people are sheep, if you will, or like it's all because people are too easy to be manipulated, and they have like shame, or they need to have more self-worth and have more personal responsibility and come out of this, more submissive mindset. One is leaving out also that part of the problem is also this master mindset, this dominator mindset. So they're both playing into each other. They're co-creating, if you will, reality. Both principles are in effect
co-creating the hell, as we're a version of hell, anyways. And so this one just explains it in a different way, more related to morality. And as we were talking about domination, it's the unsacred masculine as opposed to the sacred masculine. Master think, exemplified through psychopathy. You violate rights, you step on others, you speak falsity, you speak lies, willful deception, you initiate harm, create violence and injustice, and you crush the non-aggression principle, which is the sacred feminine version. So the unsacred masculine crushes the sacred feminine, and the unsacred feminine ignores the sacred masculine. So the left one here crushes the right one here, and the right one here ignores the left one here.
I'd like to spend a bit more time on this, because maybe if you don't mind going through it again. Also, we could break down real quickly why we're using the imagery of pillars. There's in you could say in mystery traditions, there's an association with the masculine principle and the feminine principle, both associated with one pillar. So the pillar that's in front of my face here is called the Doric pillar, I think, and the one in front of KRIS is called the Corinthian. So the Doric principle would be associated with the masculine, and the Corinthian would be associated with the feminine. In Freemasonry, they also talk about the middle pillar, the Ionic pillar, which is here in the middle. So when we're talking about when we're talking about the pillars of enlightenment, I think is what we might refer to, or we'll be talking about how one pillar is the sacred masculine principle of self-defense, whereas another pillar would be the pillar of non-violence. This pillar here is the one where we would be talking about the sacred feminine principle, the pillar of non-violence, which I think is enough to kind of understand better this. Also, the triangles are again, another symbol in alchemy for the elements, right? So fire being a masculine element and water being a feminine element. I just wanted to briefly go over that. So, and then if you don't mind going over your slide again, that would be really cool. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, like so you mentioned the ionic. I'll just mention that before I forget about it. The goal is to unite both the left and the right, both in your consciousness, the qualities, the capacities in your brain, and also in your consciousness. And these representations or emanations from your consciousness of the self-defense principle, which is the sacred masculine, and the non-aggression principle, the sacred feminine. So the goal is to unite them, and the symbol for uniting them in the Freemasonic tradition is the Ionic pillar, where you have the Doric and the Corinthian, and then you have the middle pillar, the Ionic, and this is represented in the 3rd degree tracing board. And you'll notice the background I have here that's faded out are different Freemasonic images,
Tracing
symbolic
boards.
images. Yeah, well, ones, they're not, I don't think they're all tracing boards, but a lot of them are. And they all have 2 pillars at least. And the one in the bottom left, you can't see it, but that's the 1st degree tracing board, and it has the 3 pillars. So in that one, you can kind of see it in the back. There's that middle pillar, and the goal is to get to that middle pillar. So you unite both of them, and that's also the symbol of the Seal of Solomon, which has the upward triangle and the downward triangle united, and that's a symbol that represents the unification of both. So when we apply this in the moral context, is I'll go with the right side, and I put it on the right because usually the right is associated with the feminine, the left with the masculine, hence to keep it with the symbolism of the left brain and the right brain. And in some traditions or symbolic representations, they're going to inverse it. But for here, we'll just stick to that same pattern. And I wrote that it's the default in first because it's passive. It doesn't require any action. And this is also why, as we go through it, this also leads to the understanding of what true freedom is as the default. Because to destroy true freedom, there has to be the action of immorality created in order to remove that state. So the default is what's first, and it's passive because you're not actually creating anything. You're not creating the immoral. And this is the non-aggression principle, the sacred feminine. You care for right over wrong. So in terms of you don't do the wrong, you don't do the immoral. So that's an inaction. It's an inaction, an action of inaction, known as wei wu wei as well. So it's to not initiate harm, and you do the least harm possible. Do the least harm you can because you can. It's not necessarily about doing no harm, and if you can't do absolutely no harm, then there's no point in even worrying about doing no harm, which is one of the arguments that people who want to not even bother with things, they say, oh, well, because I think they use it as an excuse because they're weak and they don't want to take on the responsibility of even reducing their harm. So it allows them to justify the immorality in whatever degree. And so they view it as, well, since I can't remove all harm, then I won't even try to remove the harm that I can, which is a cop-out, just so that you don't take responsibility and you don't grow up and you're not being an adult. And so you can remain a child just to believe that you can do whatever you want to do, irrespective of what is morally objective and right. So that leads to, you don't violate the rights of others when you're trying to do the least harm you can, because it's within your capacity to do so. And you don't do the evil and you don't support the evil. And this is representative of the lost word, which is no. And you say no to self-created evil. versus the left side, which is saying no to other created evil. So you have the evil that you create yourself. That's why it's more passive and the default, because it's about you not doing something. And here it's about you doing something. So you're saying no to other evil. And one of them can be where you speak truth. And ultimately, when there's enough quantity of people, a majority of people, will you deal with the violence where you're going to unite and enact justice, and using the last word where you say no with teeth, and you're going to do something about it, and you smack down the evil as I wrote it here. And so that's responding to the initiated harm, because there's going to be people, even if you're not initiating harm, there's going to be people that are going to be initiating harm, and they are to be dealt with at a certain point when there's enough people willing to do it. And until then, well, you can speak truth, and that's your way of acting and standing up, where you, in how you're able to, is to defend yourself and your rights. And ultimately, we're supposed to do that by enacting justice, all of us, to defend ourselves and our rights. But in the interim, there's always the great work of speaking the truth. And also at the bottom here, the representative of thelema, which is the Greek word for will, and agape, the Greek word for love. But I chose not to put love because care, I found, was more simple to understand, as opposed to the word love, which people are going to interpret in, in an emotional sense. But here it's agape, as in the wider form of love, of true care, in that aspect. So I put care instead of love, but it actually means love. But in the context of true care, that aspect of love, not love as philos or eros, of love for your friends or family, or romantic love. And I think I wanted to mention something else, but I didn't go off onto it. Now I forgot about it, but oh well.
I'd like to also to touch upon this this thing that you said about them, like how it's not really that I want to touch upon it, but if you maybe could also repeat what you said earlier about when one principle isn't balanced with the other principle. So like how you said that, or maybe that was this one.
Well, what I originally, like this one.
You
No?
said something about how like
Okay.
one pillar destroys the other pillar, like how.
Oh yeah, well this one. So here, the crush, the NAP. So as we saw in the previous slide, so this is abbreviated to NAP, right? Non-aggression principle. I have it here, NAP, and self-defense principle is SDP, keeping them both as 3-letter acronyms. But you could just say defense principle. You just call it DP, because in this part it constitutes defending others as well. So it's not just your self-defense principle, but it's just a defense principle in general. But I guess keeping it as comparative 3-letter acronyms is more harmonious in terms of how they relate. So in this aspect, the left side, when it's imbalanced, it crushes the true right side, the non-aggression principle, because it's dominating over this one. And the false right side is an unsacred feminine, which is going to ignore the self-defense principle, because instead of speaking truth and standing, you're going to be enslaved. Think of pacifism. Pacifism is you're not going to do anything to stand up for, you're not going to fight for your rights, you're not going to defend yourself. So it's just ignoring the self-defense principle, whereas domination is doing the opposite of not harming and not violating the rights of others, because it's violating the rights of others. So yeah, and I didn't speak on this right side, so that's the pacifism slave think, the submission ideologies, where you have apathy for right or wrong. Ultimately, like they both have apathy for right or wrong, but in terms of you're not even going to do something. So on the left side, it's people who are in the domination ideology. They might care if they are wronged, and they're going to do something about it. But on the right side, they're just not going to care in general because they're pacifists. So they're not going to use righteous force to combat unrighteous force of violence. And so they are going to allow the initiated harm rather than use the self-defense principle to stand against it. They're just going to allow it. And they're going to be a doormat. They're going to be stepped on by the others who are going to do the stepping on, and they're just going to be the doormats. They're not going to defend their rights. They're going to allow violence and injustice. So that's letting others be evil. And this is the one where you're being evil. So they're letting these people be. And the other one is, well, you're not letting these people be. Right? So this one is letting others be evil. And this one is you don't let others be evil. So that's why it correlates, like it correlates within itself as the opposite on the left and right sides. But it correlates as the opposite of what the other one does in terms of the left and right on the negative correlates as the opposite of the left and right on the positive side. So
Yeah,
this one's
yeah.
letting others be evil. This one's you don't let others be evil. And this one's you say no to yourself creating evil. Whereas this one is you are saying yes to yourself creating evil. You're being evil.
Yeah, and it's like it's also as if like there's like trash attracts trash as well, right? So people who have a toleration for wrongdoing will confirm each other in that they shouldn't do anything about it, and likewise people who do wrongdoing will kind of find each other and be like, yeah, this is totally justified. There's also a slide Nemo made that seems like to be on this topic, where he differentiates between different expressions of right action. And so like on the lower, this is his slide, so I'm not sure I can perfectly communicate what he's trying to say, but I'll just read a bit on it. And so there's on the lower realm, on the more personal realm, there's the non-aggression principle and the self-defense principle, or the defense principle, that you can kind of embody in the motto: don't steal, don't kneel, don't take what is not yours from anyone, don't steal, like don't take any what's not your own property, and don't kneel, don't accept that anyone should be over you, should have the right to enslave you. And then on the lowest line says these are not societal male female roles. All expressions pertain to the sovereign individual regardless of sex. I think it is maybe a bit of a difficult conversation to have this conversation on gender, because obviously gender is also the differences between the sexes. So that's definitely something that I'd like to at least mention later. This thing about how in biology we have also the principle of gender manifest itself, and also in culture, because like the demographics of a society are going to be around 50-50 men and women, something like that, right? So this principle also does play out in the general sense, in the physical sense. But yeah, this slide, then he also talks about how there is the seeking truth and the speaking truth, so that there's this willingness to learn, the readiness to learn, and then also the readiness to teach. So the more receptive and then the more assertive, you could say, qualities. But yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because it's something he's shared once in a while, from time to time in the chat. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. But we were talking about it as like, whereas this was using the triangles or the symbols for. It's funny that he's using the red and the blue actually.
Yeah, it's a great infographic apart from the colors of the red and the blue are inverted. That's the only issue it has.
Yeah, I just noticed that now. But we were talking about it as pillars before, and not that it really ties into morality a little bit maybe, but someone who also uses the imagery of pillars, but in another context, is a man called Colin Smith. He's got a channel called Lifting the Veil, and he talks about the twin pillars of truth, whereas the one's intuition, one's knowledge by inner experience would be the pillar of gnosis, of knowledge by inner experience, whereas one's knowledge by outer experimentation would be the pillar of science. So here he differentiates between two types of knowledge. And something I'd like to say about this is that I think both pillars are something we need to kind of erect or like to develop. I don't think they are necessarily the default. Like we will have the ability to have an intuition that actually serves as a truth discovery method if we heal our traumas so that we're not just interpreting our triggers as intuition, but we're like it's coming more from a more grounded place, and it's not like coming from fear. And the same kind of goes with science. I don't think it's something it's just the default that just reading scientific articles or hearing someone say, well, this is science, or some scientist did this study, is enough like to constitute a pillar or like a method of truth discovery, because then you could kind of tie it back into the like, even though it is science, you would say is more in the like, it's less in the realm of religion and more in the realm of the masculine maybe, right? The logic, linear thinking. It can still kind of become a religion with like scientism, where we're not really thinking about it, we're not really actively engaging with the data and processing it ourselves, or like reading the study so that we kind of can follow along and say, okay, this actually seems as though there aren't any fallacies being made, and it's actually a correct conclusion. And I don't really want to sound like I'm someone who has erected this pillar or like has developed this scientific mindset, and I'm just like someone to look up to regarding it. But my point is saying that I don't think they are the default. It's something that we have to develop, these two pillars, or these two methods of discovering knowledge. So it was just, and you could kind of connect it as well, maybe with gender, right? Where gnosis would be more the feminine and science would be more the masculine, I think. But that was just like a quick side note. So far we've talked about the principle of gender in relation to gender and in relation to knowledge, specifically self-knowledge, when we're talking about learning about our neocortex, the two brain hemispheres. And we can talk a bit more about that as well. We've also talked about, you could say, the morality. So that's actually not really, you could maybe tie morality into spirituality, right? So we've mentioned a bit of that, and I think what would be cool as well, Chris, would be unless you want to talk more from your slide here. I don't know why it's not coming up here. This one. We could maybe also move into talking about like culture, the manufactured gender war. I'm not in a rush, but so
Yeah, we can go to something else. I'm gonna only do like an hour, and got other stuff to do. But we can skip this one. People can go to my site, and if they want to learn more, I was just mentioning that you're fluctuating, related to the principle of rhythm. You got the two extremes where you're imbalanced in terms of the negative side, or you could have the positive aspects as well, where you could focus on one side or the other, and the positive aspects that we mentioned at the beginning, these ones. But you're going to be fluctuating between them. You're not going to be on one side all the time or on the other side all the time, because then it leads to an imbalance. Especially these negative ones is where you don't want to be on either side of these imbalances. And the positive ones, you can be there, but it can develop into the negative ones. If you have the positive side imbalance, then it can lead to the negative ones. So the goal is to not go into these negative extremes by more or less balancing the positive sides, and then you avoid going into the negatives, and you stay in that zone of balance where you're never in the center, because you fluctuate within that zone of balance. And then if you go out of that zone of balance, which is out of the fluctuation between the positive and negative sides, well, you can end up in the extremes of the negative sides, which are, as I mentioned, to be avoided as best as you can. And that's the importance, as Passio has emphasized more than in my work. He's emphasized it more to balance the left and the right brain, so that you you don't end up in that imbalance, the negative imbalances.
Are you done?
No, yeah, I told him not yet. That's why I'll do like 10 more minutes, and then that's it.
Yeah, but then I just want to give you the floor if you want to talk maybe a bit about some, unless you have more slides, I can maybe just no. Well, I'd like to squeeze the KRIS into this these 10 minutes, and then maybe I'll continue a bit with some of the other things that I think I might have missed. So, like, one of the things that I thought maybe would be cool to talk about with you is like the logic, like how the gender principle relates to logic, and this is something that for me has been really a big part of what you could say, what like started my, or like something that really was a big part of my learning journey, at least. And it's this, like, I think it's also kind of been said in some quote by a Greek philosopher, that the height of education is being able to consider a notion, but without necessarily rejecting it or accepting it. And this goes very close to what I'm trying to talk about here, is how we want to develop this ability of considering the truth, or like consider like different statements, and think about, can there be truth in both? And obviously this isn't specifically regarding gender, but I feel like you can relate it, because it's again the complementation, the and both, where you don't have to see it as a polarity, as like it's either or. Like, you can use both your brain hemispheres, for example, and in the same way you can say you can look at different notions and see both of them having some truth in them, and consider, like, if you're able to open your mind and be able to consider more than one perspective, that's where you're growing your consciousness, or you're enlarging your worldview. And obviously you should also be able to say, you know what, neither of these notions is actually true. Like, there's not truth in any of them, they're both false. So there's like you could say there's statement A, there's statement B, and then you could say, well, I see that there's truth in statement A, or I see there's truth in statement B, or I see there's truth in both statements. both have something. Or you could say actually both of these, they're not the full picture. Like neither of them are really describing reality in a way that's satisfactory or that's totally true. Like there's an infinite more statements, or like more than statements, like perspectives. There's all of that which these two statements aren't encapsulating. And that's something that for me at least has been really helpful to consider, like that there's this approach where I feel like it's a very open approach where you're in a lot of this, in this considering mind mode.
Yeah, it gets into epistemology. It's a good understanding and thinking. And for the last one, the only way you can say something is false is if you have the truth that negates it. So you could say, I'm trying to think of an example, a basic example. Is this, someone says this glass of water is hot, but then you could say, well, is it or isn't it? And to know if it's hot, one way you could know that if you look at the glass and it's the water's all frozen, then you know the water's not hot. Even if you haven't measured it to see how hot it is, you can know that it's not hot because you've observed something that negates it being hot. So you can apply that to anything. You can maybe not assert, you cannot verify the assertions of many things in the world. So you can't know that they are true. But just because you can't know that they are true doesn't mean that they are false. And if you're going to assert they're false, then you have to have some corresponding information that you know is true, that you have verified is true, that negates the other one as false. And if you can't do that, then you can't state that it's false. My God, guys. Yeah, all right. I think I'll have to end it pretty soon.
No, that's cool.
I'm
gonna thank you for coming on for an hour, Chris. It's really been a pleasure talking with you, and everyone who is interested in looking into Chris Nelson's work, you can find that at his website that's written here next to his name, evolvedconsciousness.org. He's got loads of really cool presentations, infographics, and articles. So you won't regret going to that website and checking that out. And
thanks. Have a good rest of your day. Peace out. Bye.
Yeah, what that made me think about the fact that if we want to make a claim about something being false, we need the proof of that. Was like in criminology, when like if someone has an alibi, you'll want to consider the possibility of what they're saying to be true, but then you'll maybe find, if you're a detective, you'll find some piece of information that proves their alibi to be untrue, and then you start getting a bit suspicious, right? I don't know, maybe a bit random thought to share, but yeah, I'll bring back this slide here, because what I would like to talk about as well, which the KYBALION goes into, is the principle of gender in relationship to physics or electromagnetism. Also, with you could say the culture, or like society, what's happening in a society, what's happening in also in politics, but also with in the family, and so, and then I'd like to maybe just end it with the most basic ones, like biology, or in the physical plane. So what we were talking about before, when we were talking about logic, or what I was talking about, like how there's this mode of thinking where you're considering the the possibility of truth of something without rejecting it or just accepting it. You're just considering it. That kind of ties into the principle of paradoxes, which I think is really related to the principle of gender. So a paradox is something that appears to be self-contradicting. It appears to be like you can't have both existing simultaneously. It's mutually exclusive, right? But actually, it isn't mutually exclusive. You actually can have both at the same time. Both can be true simultaneously. So, what would be an example of that? An example of that would be when it comes to determinism versus free will. This conversation when it comes to saying it's either or. Well, actually, you can say, in fact, you can have both. You can have free will as well as deterministic natural laws that you interact with through your free will. So that would be kind of a paradox. It requires of you to consider it requires of you a mode of thinking where you're able to consider the truth in the deterministic worldview as well as the truth in the randomness worldview or the free will worldview, and then you're able to synthesize them. And in the end, that's also what we want to do with our brain hemispheres. We want to be able to use our left brain thinking and also our right brain thinking. So our left brain thinking would be more the masculine, and our left brain thinking would be the more feminine. We want to unite those because the child, you could say, or the what you create, what you generate when you unite these two is a mode of consciousness that is higher than both of them. You'll arrive at you could say more like golden, or maybe like more enlightened, or that's at least something that I do believe in, that we have the ability to evolve our consciousness, like to access higher forms of thinking if we're engaging in both the left and more analytical and the right more holistic forms of thought. So that was a bit about that it doesn't have to be binary, the either or, which I think relates to gender. That we can have, you could say, both these forms of thinking. And when we're talking about electromagnetism, which is in the realm of physics, you can see how you have both the positive and the negative poles of electricity. And the positive pole would be the one that is associated with the masculine energy, whereas the negative pole is the one that is associated with the feminine energy. So the positive is the more you could like, we don't want to misunderstand it, because actually, even though the negative is the you wouldn't call that maybe the active one, but it actually is there where a lot of the work is happening. The positive wants to move towards the negative, and then the negative is the one that is attracting, has this magnetism. And I don't want to talk too much about it, since I'm not really that much in the know regarding electromagnetism. I don't really have the science in order here, and I don't want to just repeat something nonsensical. But I think it is interesting to look at the principle of gender in relationship to the physics or the electromagnetism. That's at least one of the planes, or one of the areas where we can see it manifest itself. Then I'd like to talk a bit about how in our society you'll have you'll have like in just like the demographics of a society will probably be around 50-50. You'll have around 50% men and 50% women. So what is the relationship between men and women? And if the relationship between men and women is a healthy relationship, that is good for freedom. That means we're able to cooperate, we're able to work together to solve problems, and we're not using each other as scapegoats. Whereas if the relationship between men and women isn't healthy, is, I would say, to use a more popular term, toxic, then that would be good for slavery. Because if we're using each other as, if we're pointing each other saying that the other gender is the problem, we're distracted. It's the old divide and conquer, strategy, where if people are divided, it will be more easy to conquer them, to control them, right? So this is a dynamic we want to admit, that when we're looking at society, we are seeing a lot of people behaving like children, behaving as like the old. I remember when I was in school, there would be like this: boys are better than girls, and the boys would mention all the things that boys had done or men had done, which would then somehow prove that one gender was better than the other, and the same the girls would do, like well, girls did this and girls do that, and so on. So it's this very immature dynamic where in the end no one is really turns out as the winner, because what we want to do is, instead of fighting each other, we want to acknowledge how beautiful our relationship can be. So we need more conversations between men and women. We need to, or we should seek those conversations. We should seek those relationships that are mutually uplifting, or respectful, and that are ultimately contributing to more health in society and more freedom in society. So when we're talking about the gender, the principle of gender, what's something that we want to touch upon when we're talking about society and culture? Okay, so one thing that I think is very, something people will encounter is this idea of traditional gender roles, that women should do certain roles and men should do other roles. That it's the role of women to, be more nurturing, and it's the role of men to be more, protective or something like that, or, go out and hunt if you want to go. Well, and so is there any truth to this idea? It's something that in my time, at least, and even just like this past century, is something that has been criticized. It's been taken up and considered to be maybe not as true as we would like to. Maybe there's just like a bias. Maybe it is because of men's dominance in history, that there's been this story, or this justification of that men should be on top and women should be more submissive. But I don't know about that. I mean, I think that it is important to also look at like these gender roles as relating to biological gender. This is something where I agree a lot with a woman called Camille Paglia. Is that her? I don't know how to say her name. Camille Paglia. She's an author that talks about how we should be looking at gender roles from a place of knowledge, like knowledge of biology, that when we're looking at gender roles in different cultures, even though there will be differences, there will be certain similarities that must be addressed, that it isn't just, you know, socially constructed roles, that there are actually differences in abilities that are, you know, there's nothing wrong in that. It's not something that we should feel as though there's injustice in that, or that there's something we ought to be sad about. I think one of her points is also that we shouldn't necessarily just accept it, that we shouldn't, you know, be like her point of view isn't necessarily that we should just live in alignment with nature, because she has more of this idea that civilization is what allows people to be more free. So where nature would be this more, you know, destructive force, and she associates a lot the efforts having been made by men to contribute to the possibility for women to be more free. And obviously that's not really the most popular opinion in feminism. She calls herself the anti-feminist feminist, and she would probably also be called, you know, a TERF and such, because she's not in agreement with that people can biologically change their gender. But that doesn't mean that she's, you know, saying that there's anything wrong with, you know, wanting to live the way you want to live, to, like, you can also like to not conform with gender roles and be you do you, right? I think for me, my personal opinion on regarding when it comes to people not wanting to conform to certain gender roles is that I see it as completely understandable that they look within and they see that they have, you know, both these energies. They have the masculine and the feminine energy, and they don't just want to identify with one of these these energies. But still, I think there is some value or something truly valuable in having an identity rooted in one's gender, in knowing that there are certain differences between the genders, and the fact that one has a biological gender isn't meaningless. There's some meaning to be gained from that, or to be found in that, and one can use this, or one can align oneself with that, or not be at least ignorant of it. I don't know how much one wants to align with it. People will be free to do what they want to do. I think there's at least something to be understood when people are saying they don't identify with either or regarding these roles. I think that makes sense. Like, it isn't. I don't want to live in a society where all men are alike and all females are the same, and we just have to be different. Yet there is also value in you know, having that tension or that difference. It doesn't have to be, you know, this dynamic. It can also just be like a more beautiful whole, or totality through difference. And this, you know, blurring of the differences isn't necessarily something that is valuable. Like, I think at least that we should, you know, what's it called? We should cherish and celebrate the differences that there are, instead of wanting us all to be, you know, androgenized and being able, everyone to do the same things, that no one is is different. Everyone is equal also in abilities. That's not something I'm a fan of, at least. So that was a bit about the gender, you know, in society. I'd like to talk a bit more about it because it is an interesting dynamic, and I mean, it's something that will definitely trigger some, but also be very relieving for others. And obviously, if people find value in this topic, I'd like to mention that there's a whole show by Derek Bartolocelli and Leslie Powers called Dissolving the Divide. And Dissolving the Divide, I think, aims to, you know, look at these divisions in our society or in the individual and address them in such a way that we don't necessarily are trapped into falsehood, but we can free ourselves from this false polarities. So they've had lots of conversations with different people that are worth checking out. Also with Maria West that we had on our show once when we talked about sexuality. She had one. They did a show together called Identitarianism. Yeah, I think I nailed it there. All about, you know, the thing with people having doing the identity politics. Also, there's they did a show with Brandon Spencer, where I think they talked about the division within and how to heal that. So that was probably about, you know, the brain hemispheres. And I think also they did another one as well with Maria West. So go check that out. Dissolving the Divide. It's in the links below as well. And what else? I mean, I think what is worth also understanding is how that there is a lot of mind control happening. There is a lot of social engineering, and a lot of that is, you could say, targeted towards women. But not only. I mean, there's mind control targeting at both. But why would there be so much, you know, brainwashing of women? And this slide here is something I made to kind of illustrate that men are actually, to a large degree, they are shaped by their female influencers, like their sisters, their mothers, or their teachers, and their partners. So if you can manipulate women, then you can through women manipulate men. Like if women don't want to be with certain men because of qualities that in actuality are good qualities, then those qualities will be, you know, filtered out from society, because in the end it's like if those women don't want to be with those men, then that's going to be the determining factor. What's that called in evolution theory? It's called the natural selection, right? So I mean, for me, and I'm obviously into this material or into this topic, so I'm obviously biased, but for me it's self-apparent that there is a manipulation going on of women. There is an engineering where that isn't about understanding anymore the equality of rights, but it's something else happening. Like it's a stage of feminism where it doesn't seem as though that's the goal anymore, that it's actually trying to go into the opposite side of wanting to be the dominator and have men be more submissive, or that it's this, you know, ignorance of nature, or of hormones, and of, you know, and of morality, where it just feels as though that the value system of women are being completely manipulated into something where it doesn't seem like it's authentic anymore. And there's a slide that kind of goes into this this dynamic of authentic relationships, and this is the slide, so I'll go through it with you. So there's the inauthentic, quote unquote, beta, that is conditioned to submit to the dominator type, or the quote unquote alpha. And then there's the inauthentic, quote unquote, alpha, that is conditioned to desire the dominator type, or another alpha, and to control the submissive, quote unquote, beta. And then you have the authentic, which is free of social engineering conditioning, who does not play this control game. And I would say that finding someone who is authentic like that is a rare thing. That there's a tendency for there's a higher tendency to be inauthentic, to be conditioned to submit, or to be conditioned to desire being a dominator, or to be in control of others. And yeah, I mean, let me know what you think in the comment section regarding this manufactured gender war. I'm curious to hear what people think about it. There's, in my opinion, at least, like a big conversation here to have, and a valuable conversation that is important to have if we want to move forward, and not be stuck in a dynamic of very immature energy. And even though people are grown-ups, and it should be expected of them that they have healed themselves and are psychologically mature, fact is a lot of people are still psychologically children, and are projecting onto the external these archetypes of mother and father, and that is what is happening with the state, is that there's this archetype being projected onto it, or the father qualities of the protector, and the mother qualities of the nourisher being projected onto the state or the government. And if men and women are to have healthy relationships, what we need to look at is what constitutes an unhealthy relationship or dysfunctional relationship. And that's where people aren't really having a relationship with truth. When people are just having a relationship with falsehood and the programming that they're receiving from state indoctrination camps, what we have is this satanic bond with the state. Every individual doesn't really have a relationship with truth, or with the creator, or with God, with nature, with source, with principles and morality, which is the requirement. If every individual develops this relationship first, then the relationship between each other can be much more genuine. All right. Yeah, I mean, so this has turned out a bit more like a presentation. It's not really a roundtable discussion. And I think I'm gonna bring up a video, because that way I feel like I have something also besides my own my own thoughts that I can talk about. So This is something that Mark PASSIO said in an interview with Keith Knight. Check it out.
Of man in your excellent talk regarding feminism and the satanic epi-eugenics agenda, you talk about the purpose of dividing man versus women, black versus white, but you say there's an extra significance with the gender divide because it is a 50-50. What is the purpose of dividing the genders?
The biggest cohesive glue in a society regarding morality and social cohesion in general is the bond between man and woman. And you only need to gauge or measure the healthiness of a society and the strength of the state, by the way, which is inversely proportional to the health of a society, by how well do men and women get along with each other within that society. Now think about what I just said there. The biggest social cohesive glue in all of society is the bond between man and woman. And the health of a society is gauged by how strong that bond is. And the health of the state is gauged by how weak that bond is. The power of the state is inversely proportional to the strength of that bond. Therefore, you automatically know the social engineers are going to want to drive a wedge between men and women. And all we have to do is look around, see, it's all scientifically observable. It has nothing to do with opinion. It has nothing to do with belief. It is observable. How powerful is the state? Then look at that's the effect. Okay? How much do men and women truly get along and love each other and respect each other in our society? Is it about mutual respect? Is it about getting along? Or is it about power over the other? Is it about wanting something from the other? Okay? And only seeing what you can get from the other, from the opposite sex. And this is what our society has totally devolved into because of the social engineers driving a wedge and forging a gender war between the sexes. And also, putting in the notions that there are like 60 some genders as well. Believe me, I'm friends with transgendered individuals and have no problem with their choice to do that. It's not about discrimination. But when you're starting to try to tell people biology has no bearing on what gender is, you're trying to redefine science. You're trying to redefine truth and reality. So, to go back to the notion that these social engineers know that the strength of the state hinges upon whether men and women are actually together exploring morality, are fostering true values, especially propagating true values to the young, like truth and freedom and morality. Okay. If that's not being done, you're having the state raise children. You're having constant division and warring between people in their own families and amongst their friends. And, nobody is going to be unifying together and fighting the state if they believe, there's a patriarchy and men are the enemy, or, all women have an evil nature and should be avoided and we shouldn't, interact with them. Because that's what there's a pushback. You have the feminists forming this idea of the patriarchy. You know how much loathing I get viewed with? I mean, I feel like I'm discriminated against walking down the street just because I'm a white, middle-aged, masculine man. Okay? It's as if somehow you're the enemy. I'm fighting for freedom. I'm fighting for rights. I'm fighting for what's right, for morality. And I'm somehow the enemy because of my gender. I see it every day. And guess what, Keith? It's hard. It is hard to be viewed like that and to not want to come with some kind of a blowback toward that other person, because you have to constantly just remind yourself they're just a fucking dunce. They're just so painfully dumb because of their social engineering. They're just so fucking dumb. that you have to feel sorry for them instead of, see, I get into the notion of, I really start to hate people when they act like this. Okay, it's a battle for me every day not to fall into total 100% hatred. Okay, but then, you know, and sometimes I don't accomplish it. Sometimes it gets to me, man. You know, but it's like I have to go back and constantly remind myself they're just so stupid because of what they've been taught that's not true. They have a religion. It's the same thing for these guys who insistently think women are just evil. It's just, it's like this biblical notion that, oh, Eve was the woman who gave sin to Adam, you know, and like modern guys in the men's rights movement, but particularly the MGTOW movement, have this notion that the nature of women is just evil. You know, they're not looking at social engineering. You know, they're not looking at the long march through the institutions that has done this, that has put people into this condition and fostered this gender war. Then they take the opposite approach. We're just going to hate on them. We're not going to talk to them to try to properly re-educate them. We're just going to, you know, say that they're fundamentally at their nature flawed and evil. And what's that going to do? Is that going to solve the problem? No, it's going to drive a further wedge between people. And this is what the social engineers want, you know? And men can be said to be just as equally stupid and just as equally not educated because they don't understand the world of the occult. They don't understand social engineering. They don't understand hidden knowledge. They don't understand hidden psychology. They don't understand mind control. You know, they think, they look at a picture, women are acting like this to me, so they must just be bad people. No, it's the condition that they've been worked into, just like men have been worked into a condition.
It's a condition. It's a condition that we've been worked into. It's not the authentic nature of men and women. So obviously, gender is a very sensitive subject, kind of like the Twin Towers. There used to be two of them. And what we got to look at is the nature. So ultimately, what I'll have to do is bring it back to biology, which is the plane that is the most tangible to look at. So when we're talking about gender in biology, we're talking about how the maleness or the sex of beings, like in plants and in animals, play a role in the reproduction system. And one really cool thing to look at is to compare plant and human reproductive systems to see how that this is something that happens in nature. And it's also cool to look at in connection with the principle of correspondence, another Hermetic principle. So when we're comparing plant and human reproductive systems, we can see that a plant has male and female organs, and so do humans. A plant has male gamete, which is pollen, and male has sperm. And here's, I think, personally, a really cool image, that very colorful, very lovely. And then the female gamete is the egg produced in the ovule, and then in a plant, and then in humans, that is the egg produced in the ovary. Then in plant, it's the pollen nuclei which fuses with the egg nuclei. This is the fertilization. And in humans, it's the sperm nuclei which fuses with the egg nuclei. And in both plant and human, you have then the diploid zygote. You can really hear my knowledge of biology is just tipped up. Then the zygote, the zygote, how do you say that? The zygote grows into embryo, and that's the same for human. Then in the plant, the embryo grows inside a protective seed coat, whereas in the human, the embryo grows inside a protective womb. And lastly, then the nourishment is provided in the plant. It's provided by the cotyledon, whereas in the human, it's provided by the placenta. So I think that's a really cool little comparison to make, to see how, at least in biology, the principles of gender are in effect. Another thing regarding the principle of gender is how in some beings you'll have this principle in the same being, like you'll have the hermaphrodites, and I can't really say a lot about that, but that is an interesting thing that you see in some animals. But generally speaking, you'll have one female being organism and or another organism that is male, and then obviously both have to be of the same race in order to procreate. So the principle of gender in biology, what can I say about it? I don't know if I can say that much about it. I mean, something I could say is, again, the differences between the genders. I'm someone who thinks that there are some significant differences between the genders, and again, it is a sensitive subject for a lot of people. I think it's a beautiful subject to talk about, something that carries within the topic a lot of spiritual growth if we know how to apply it. Like also, if we want to tie it back into the electromagnetism, you can also kind of say that the challenge for a man is the charge, or like the electric charge, and it's this, he has to pressure himself, whereas in the challenge for a woman is more the attraction and what she's drawing in, the energy that she's drawing in, and of course having boundaries can be a challenge that's for everyone, obviously. And yeah, but also, like, you want to draw in something, but then you have to find out how to draw that in without maybe putting a boundary or putting up a wall. It would be cool to talk with someone about it. So you know what, if people want to hop on, you're very welcome, but if not, I'll probably just end it shortly. So I think I've talked a bit about what there is to what I wanted to talk about: the psychology, the culture, the biology, the logic, knowledge, spirituality, physics, and religion. I think the spirituality aspect of it is really an interesting part, where a cool illustration of someone who has integrated both the self-defense principle, the sacred masculine pillar, and also the non-violence principle is this illustration here. Maybe I'll remove the background to kind of make it more simple, less distractions. This is an individual who you're seeing is very calm, is just chilling, and in this like lotus meditation pose. Not someone who seems very aggressive when you look at her. And then she's also holding these weapons and is wearing martial arts clothes. So she obviously also has the ability to set boundaries and defend herself. And I think this is the balance we want to strike, being able to both defend ourselves but also keep calm, and also have the more empathic and nurturing aspects, which reminds me of a movie called The Art of Self-Defense, a comedy / thriller that I definitely recommend that to anyone who hasn't watched that. That goes into the topic of self-defense, but also how to balance that so it doesn't become extreme, and there's also the place for the feminine principle of non-violence and empathy. I think this is something that I'd really like to read with you. This is something that Brandon Martin wrote once. It's titled "The False, quote-unquote, New Age Notion of Positive versus Negative." People should be very cautious about confusing elemental powers and the polarity of inner source energy with human behavior. Elemental powers, specifically the polarities of positive electrical forces and magnetic/negative forces in nature, being confused with positive/good and negative/evil behavior from human beings. These are very different applications of the context, and I find most have not ever talked about the definitive difference of the two. A little typo there. Positive and negative elemental powers are both neutral. They are not good nor evil. They both work in alignment with each other to create that which is. They are the sacred genders of creation, or the sacred feminine and masculine attributes of existence. Neither of these are good nor evil. They just are. Human behaviors, on the other hand, are not neutral, since human beings possess the capacity for holistic intelligence and free will. There is a hugely different context when we're speaking of positive and negative. People tend to confuse the two and talk about them as if they are the same or synonymous, when in fact they are not. Elemental powers have no free will, or the ability to steer itself away from causing harm. A tornado cannot decide not to destroy a village. Lightning does not choose to electrocute. Energy does not choose to create evil consequences, whereas human beings are capable of choosing to steer away from negative consequences because of their intelligence, reasoning, knowledge, and free will. This, also known as religiously and superstitiously anthropomorphizing elemental powers, or adding human characteristics to elemental powers, where there are none. We must be careful not to We must be careful not to We must be careful not to anthropomorphize. There you go. And I lost. Where was I? Energies. We must be careful not to anthropomorphize. Here we go again. We must be careful not to anthropomorphize energies with the concepts of good and evil. Anthropomorphizing elemental powers leads to religious indoctrination, which tends to give the individual a perception of the universe that half of it is evil and half of it is good, which is completely wrong when one using the ability to reason, when using one's ability to reason. Half of the universe is not evil, and if you think so, then you're under religious mind control. When can exhaust ourselves showing how wrong this is. We can exhaust ourselves showing how wrong this is, but for this I will only give a few examples. Let's look at a battery. A battery has both positive and negative polarities. In one of these polarities of this energies, if one of these polarities of energy is removed, and we try to use the battery in a flashlight, then it would not function, or the light would not come on properly, thus giving us what we could call a bad result or non-functioning. If these two natural polarities that are in balance with each other or are charged, then the result will be what we call good or functioning. We say things like that soda machine is out of order, meaning it is not functioning properly, and the result of us placing an order, we will not get what we ordered. If we ask ourselves if the universe is functioning the way it is meant to, I'm sure we will say it is. Thus, the result of its function is that of goodness. When we place an order into the universe based on cause and effect, we get exactly what we are supposed to get based upon what we have set into motion through our consciousness and actions. It is not a personal force, so it may not be what we wanted because we do not fully understand how to properly place an order in the universe. If we went to a restaurant and did not know how to communicate with the server, we most likely will not get what we are trying to order. We lack the grammar that is necessary to meet the universal requirements to get good results at this point in our history, or in other words, we have not understood natural law and how to live in harmony with it. There is no evil tornado or electricity. There's no evil when a tree consumes water to create fruit. The tree is naturally always in alignment with these two polarities, even though we might perceive the death of a tree to be bad. It's not. The tree does not have free will, meaning that it does not have the ability to govern these energies. Like I said, it is in a natural state of balance within the two polarities. There is no evil in a tornado that has taken your house out, but there is evil in martial law and slavery. There is no evil in a flood that has destroyed your crops, but there is evil and acts of arson and vandalism. You do not look at the negative polarity of magnetism and say that that is evil. You do not look at the negative polarity of electricity and say that that is evil. These are natural expressions in which that we have applied human characteristics to which has degraded the actual information. There is evil in men who have the capacity to know not to do a specific action that causes harm and still choose to do that. Actually, that is where all evil exists. Evil is a choice, which can only be made by beings with the capacity of holistic intelligence, since human beings are the agent of reasoning to understand objective morality. It is their responsibility to thus live in harmony with that knowledge, to reduce and steer away from unnecessary harm being done upon other sentient beings. There's such a thing as objective good and bad, objective morality, objective right and wrong, and it is not because man has said so, or all quote-unquote is relative. This is something that is built inherently into the governing dynamics, cause and effect of human behavior. We also need to understand that the idea that the middle path is gray is part of the issue, because gray can waver dramatically depending on which energies are in control or overtaking one another. If the darkness is overtaking the light, the gray is still existing, yet the light is diminishing. If the light is overtaking the darkness, the gray is still existing, but yet the darkness is diminishing. This is the issue, that we seemingly tend to separate those two energies, not realizing that they are one. Evil is a choice, only made from beings with the capacity to know the difference between objectively right and wrong behavior. You are very different than a plague and a fire, elemental powers, because you have the ability to make a choice. You are not predetermined to do things you do. Fire or a plague are completely choiceless, absent of the ability to discern right action from wrong action. Human beings, on the other hand, have the capacity to do that, which makes you the agent of the ability to respond thus. It is a responsibility or an ability to respond. Considering that we have the capacity to know whether we should or should not perform certain actions, it then gives us the responsibility to act upon that knowledge in accordance with that understanding to create true wisdom, which is moral action. Right and wrong do matter, because it means the difference between truth or falsehood and freedom or slavery. Freedom is always 100% good and moral. Slavery is always 100% immoral and evil. Whether we want to accept that or not is irrelevant. Everything that is evil destroys freedom. Everything that is evil limits the potential for freedom to manifest. This ideology that energy is evil and that the universe is half evil gives people a lame and erroneous excuse for humans to justify their evil behavior and allow evil to run amok all over this world. It makes people passive in the face of evil deeds and of them to abdicate their personal responsibility to deal with it when it is in their presence. Saying that somehow that all the evil deeds that people are doing and have done balances out all the good is utter nonsense, and is based on a religious dogma which does not hold up through scientific research. Like you have to have an equal amount of, as if you have to have an equal amount of rape to that of consensual sex activity for it to balance out, or for every baby born there has to be someone that dies. This is a logical fallacy and propagated by the dark occult sorcerers who rule the minds of men in this world. This comes to our ability to reason correctly. It is mind-boggling that it is man's job to reason, but yet he has allowed error to rule his mind. Wait, I don't understand that. It is mind-boggling that it is man's job to reason, but yet he has allowed error to rule his mind. He has allowed error. Yeah, I don't know why there's so many typos in this. I apologize for that. Anyways, so when it comes to negative vibes, we must use a great deal of discernment to fully understand what this means. Most falsely think that the vibration is, if the vibration is bad or negative, when in fact it is simple a means of transferring information to consciousness. The vibration is not bad, but it may be telling us through the information it is carrying that the environment, person, or situation could be bad or go wrong if we continue to engage in or with them. We also must take into account the receiver's underlying trauma. If the receiver is damaged through trauma, we may be interpreting the information wrong, which I have found that most are. It is a very low % of the time that a person is truly listening to their intuition rather than the triggered trauma. There is a difference between the underlying trauma and an authentic intuitive thought/feeling. People have a really hard time distinguishing one from the other, and this has led to many logical fallacies. It is what I call emotional mind control, where you are solely gauging a thing only based upon how it makes you feel rather than of critical thinking and discernment. Of course, you should never negate the emotion, but understand that they can never waver radically away from, you should understand that they can waver radically away from truth. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think of terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Nikola Tesla. Right and wrong behavior comes down to the simple question: does the behavior lead to the consequences of a violation of other beings' rights or the destruction of their freedom at any level? Does it cause unnecessary harm or not? If it does, then it is absolutely, immutably, and unwaveringly a wrong and an immoral behavior, no matter what we quote-unquote want or may perceive it as. Since we have the capacity to understand the difference between between the objective notions of right and wrong behavior, this gives us the ability to respond, or the responsibility to that knowledge to uphold these ethical principles and live through a path of non-coercive lifestyle. If we say we want freedom, we have to meet the requirements of the natural law, because we live in a reality based of cause and effect. We have to recognize that evil only exists within beings that have the capacity for holistic intelligence, meaning those who are capable of knowing the difference between right and wrong, because human nature has determined those boundary conditions for us. It's one of the most beautiful things about human beings, that we have the ability to choose to do good because we conceive of it ourselves, not because it is forced upon us. The deterministic component to reality is natural law. And then the randomness component is free will. These two components determines the result of our experiences here. Nature's true homeostasis is balance, and human freedom is true balance and the natural state for us to live in. That balance is only manifested through the application of the understanding of natural law. Since human beings have the capacity to wield positive and negative energy for good, morality, or evil, immorality, they now have the responsibility to understand the natural homeostasis of those two energies together. When I am speaking of positive and negative energies, I am not referring to them as good or evil. Positive and negative energies are simply neutral. Energies like the positive and negative side of a battery. Neither of these are good nor bad until they are wielded. The level of consciousness that is willing to use that is wielding the energies determines the outcome or results. If the energies are radically out of balance, then we can safely say that the being wielding that force is not properly using them, and thus the consequences will be bad. And once taken to the aggregated level of the human race, it will be catastrophic. Vice versa. If those two energies are put into balance or natural state of homeostasis, and the being chooses to do what he knows to be right in the face of all the fear. He is putting himself in the most natural state of his true being he could ever be in, because it is aligning consciousness and action in the universe to be in homeostasis with that which is, or truth and natural law. Since human beings have the capacity of free will to wield positive and quote-unquote negative energy dualistically, they now have the responsibility to understand the natural homeostasis of those two energies together. When I am speaking of quote-unquote positive and negative energy, again, I am not referring to them as good or evil until they are wielded. The level of consciousness of the being wielding energy is if the level of consciousness of the being wielding energy is very low, and they themselves are radically out of balance from natural law, then consequences will be evil, catastrophic, especially at the aggregated level of humanity. Vice versa, if those two polarities are put into balance or a natural state of homeostasis, and the being chooses to do what they know to be right, which is wisdom in the face of all the fear, he is putting himself in the most natural state of his true being he could ever be in, because he is aligning their consciousness and actions in the universe to be in a... Wait, haven't I already read that? To resist all forms of evil is true enlightenment. We cannot justify evil behaviors through the balancing nature of the energies within the universe. This is a logical fallacy. This is where we are trying to mold the universe to our liking, so that we allow these imbalances to take place. It's a very strong tactic of the ego mind to get the higher self to stand down in the face of evil and fall into the lower self modalities. In times of such imbalance, it is necessary for the light worker to step up and shine brighter so that the balance may be manifested. To justify all the evil doing in the world through the Babylon bullshit is a fallacy, or maybe the Bible, I don't know. It is exactly why evil is overtaking the world, and what evil needs to overtake the human mind. It is evil itself. This puts one in the position to say that I do not have to do anything to create change, and even if I did, I cannot, because it is just natural. It will balance itself out. This is also the religious thinking of the predeterminism and the absence of an individual's ability to create change through free will action. Freedom is vast possibilities. With these possibilities comes the high chance for chaos. But chaos is the teacher. It is only whether we are willing to learn the lessons that chaos is teaching will we ever expand and grow to be in the constant insanity of repetitive cycles of self-destruction. Wait, that I have to read again. Oh, maybe I can make it smaller here. It is only whether we are willing to learn the lessons that chaos is teaching. Wait, because all of the typos here are making me kind of not really understand this sentence here. It is only whether we are willing to learn the lessons that chaos is teaching will we actually expand and grow beyond the constant insanity. I think because it must be like either or here, right? So it is only whether we are willing to learn the lessons that chaos is teaching us to actually expand and grow, or be on the constant insanity of a repetitive cycle of self-destruction. No. Chaos is the teacher. It is only whether we are willing to learn the lessons that chaos is teaching us that determines if we will expand and grow, or be on the constant insanity of repetitive cycles of self-destruction. Simply put, there is no true evil in nature. And when we justify our evil through nature, we have already been conformed to evil itself. There is unnecessary chaos, which is violence, and unnecessary suffering, and necessary chaos, which is about learning and growth. We need some chaos, but not all of chaos is what we need. Unnecessary chaos is evil, and the other is not. Problems are not supposed to be repetitive. Problems are supposed to evolve along with the consciousness itself. When the problems do not evolve, it is simply because the consciousness, that which is observing the issues, has not learned lessons, in which it has not diagnosed the causal factors of the issue, nor have they actually applied action to change the causal factors to get a different result. Problems are meant to evolve with the expansion and evolution of consciousness. If the problem does not evolve and we are stuck in a repetitive cycle of unchanged, evil is the destruction of freedom. Wait, okay, there's two more pages. So next time you're speaking about positive and negative, make sure that you're in full awareness of the context you were speaking of it in. Are you speaking about human behavior, or are you speaking about elemental powers, vibration, and polarity? A lot of this is rooted in primordial fears of darkness, where we have associated darkness to be evil and light to be good. Or we've associated darkness to be evil or bad, and then also associated the feminine attribute to the principle of darkness that's leading way for a lot of oppression towards the feminine gender, which is part of the issue. Light/positive and darkness/negative are but measurements of the same underlying energy. This is also where we get so much negativity toward the female gender, because we have associated the symbol of a female to darkness and simultaneously bad or evil. But the female energy nor the female gender is not actually bad or evil. We are not born bad. And if you think we are, then you are thinking that it is preordained to be that way, and your free will choice has no consequence. Darkness is associated with fear because darkness is where the predators lie. It is the unseen realm. It is the vastness of unknowingness, etc. But it is not evil. It is just as equally as important to be understood. It is just as equally as important to understand the negative as it is to understand positive. And when we fall into an imbalance of only focusing on the positive, we are starting to downgrade and dilute to our own internal positive and negative forces of masculine and feminine. This is where the false notion of karma comes into play, thinking that some outside force governs whether a good and bad action will take place. It is an idea of preordained deterministic existence. There is karma, but it doesn't work like this. It doesn't say since this is bad. It does say since this bad action has occurred, then this. No, sorry, it doesn't. Yeah, again, another typo. It doesn't say, karma doesn't say since this bad action has occurred, then this good action must occur to balance it out. Or since that person did wrong, the universe will make sure he gets his. This is just another excuse for people to sit back and do nothing in the face of wrongdoings. I've even heard people say that karma will preordain you to come back into existence into a bad life, so it balances out the bad that you had done in your previous life, which is utter bull. A child that is born into an abusive parental relationship, it's not because of its previous life that child is having negative consequences. It is because of those two individuals that are freely choosing to do those behaviors that are causing the negative consequences. There's not some outer force that is governing or preordaining that child to be abused. How sick are you to think of that? All of this is about abdication of personal responsibility and trying to disown your bad actions onto some other elemental power. Nothing but excuses for the wrongdoings that are occurring. A cowardly way of justifying your actions. We must be very cautious when it comes to our ideas, words, and concepts that we are trying to use when speaking to other people, and when it comes to our own worldviews. Please do not confuse your internal polarity of positive and negative energy with external behaviors of good and evil actions. Thanks everyone for sticking to. This was something written by Brandon Martin regarding the, what was it called again? The false new age notion of positive versus negative. And yeah, it really is something to have, like, important to address these new age beliefs, because they are just as popular as they were, back in the 70s when they first started. if not even more. Like they've really evolved, you could say. Like it's some next level mind control happening. Like here's another slide that kind of shows this dynamic of the human potential movement. So in New Age, you'll have the more feminine, safe spaces, the cult/communities where it's all about that non-violent communication, and all of these teachers that are related to the Esalen Institute, and it's all about getting drugged out and going to a trance festival or something like that. And then you have the more like the self-help, the success, personal growth, and neurolinguistic programming being taught, where it kind of looks like it's maybe some more pyramid schemes or that kind of thing going on. So we really do have to be wary of the New Age stuff, and get our more, you could say, masculine or logical thinking in order. And in regards to the thing we just read, I think for me it is important also because it does tie into freedom when it comes to if we're choosing the less of two evils in if we go vote when there's like political elections. We're doing that because we're kind of seeing, well, evil is in some way necessary. And this ties into this idea that there's some sort of balance between good and evil, when that's more of like a polarity, whereas the balance would be in relationship to gender. That's where it's non-binary, where you can have both at the same time. And we do want to have both at the same time. We do want to have the masculine and the feminine within ourselves be wedded. There's this alchemical notion of the hieros gamos, the wedding of the two energies, if you will, and that's also related to the two pillars that we showed earlier in the show. Anyways, I think I'm kind of finished here with presenting a bit more. I did around 1 more hour, and I don't see really any questions in the comment section. So I'll just thank everyone for having tuned in to this episode of Europa Natural Law. This is actually going to be the last episode of where we cover the Hermetic principles. So we will, in all probability, take a break from these roundtable transmissions. It's been really cool to have these roundtables discussions and have everyone show up. We won't go through the so-called 8th principle that we kind of already have touched upon in a transmission we called the generative principle and true care. So I will be hosting a group reading over at the ARC book club. So I'll share a link to that in the comment section, and there's also already a link down below in the video description. And next time we'll be just finishing the book, the KYBALION. There's a last chapter where we'll be reading some of the Hermetic axioms. But this actually does conclude the Europa Natural Law forum transmissions, at least for a while. I don't know if it's going to be a permanent holiday or if there'll be a reunion, or we'll continue someday. But for me, at least, this has been it for now. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who has participated in the discussions. I've really enjoyed being part of them, and also everyone who has tuned in and supported this effort. Thanks to Nemo, who started it, and Derek, who has been the producer, and Vaughn and Tommy, and there's just so many. I can't really mention all of you. Well, I could, but my memory isn't that good. Sorry. But everyone who's been part of them, thank you so much. Everyone who has been listening, thanks a lot. And with that, have a great Sunday evening. Bye-bye.